Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar, Pharma Deals Review, M&A Dynamic ahead of JP Morgan 2026. And also Happy New Year, because we are still at the beginning of the year. We wish you all the best. So I'm Caroline BOULLIAT. I'm founder and CEO of Genchrome, PharmD by background. I spent most of my career in pharma, working for big pharma, as we call them, working for Gilead, GSK, Merck, Pfizer, and Amgen. And now with Genchrome, I work with a team of pharma experts like me who are helping biotech company, especially on their commercialization and access to ensure they get the right asset to the market. We also do commercial due diligence, and importantly, we support pharma and biotech in licensing in and out of their assets. So we are less than a week away from JP Morgan in San Francisco next year. So we are delighted to be able to share some early insights of what could happen there and also review what happened in 2025. So I'm delighted to be today with two speakers, Eric Tokat from Centerview and Marc de Garidel from Abivax, who are going to introduce themselves just now. So Eric, if you want to start.
Thank you, Caroline. Eric Tokat, I'm one of the founders of the healthcare practice at Centerview Partners. Currently co-president of investment banking. I spend most of my time in biopharma M&A space over the years, a banker for about 25 years. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Eric. Marc?
So again, thanks, Caroline, for organizing this meeting with prestigious Eric here. My background is CEO of Abivax. It was called last year in the Wall Street Journal as a French obscure biotech company. So probably a bit less obscure now. I've been there for 3 years, but before that, I was CEO of 2 Boston-based biotech, which were sold to big pharma. We'll speak to that probably in a few minutes. And then I ran also Ipsen for many years, and I am still a chairman.
Thank you, Eric. Just for the audience, you have the possibility to ask questions. You should have a box with the Q&A, and we might take some of those questions at the end if we have time. And just to let you know, we are nearly 500 people registered at this webinar, so it's very well attended, as you can see. So, Eric, what I suggest, we have put a few slides that you kindly shared with us. Maybe we do a review of 2025 and compare that to the previous year to start. So let me just share my screen to start. And you tell me if you see my slides.
We can see the slides. Thank you.
Perfect.
Maybe you go to the next page. And again, thanks for having us, Caroline. And it's a pleasure and honor to be with Marc as well. He's a longtime friend, a client, a great person to be doing this together. So 2025 was actually a very strong year for life sciences M&A. It had started strong with 3 transactions actually at JP Morgan last year that we at Centerview have executed. A sale of Intracellular to J&J. It's about a $14.5 billion commercial stage neuroscience company. And then 2 earlier stage assets. One was IDRx sale to GSK, and one Scorpion Therapeutics sale to Lilly. And when I was asked at the beginning at one of the fireside chats at JPM, how do you think the year will go? I said, my guess is the year will be similar to today in that we're going to have large deals like the Intracellular deal that are late stage to commercial stage. And we will also have mid to early stage deals just like the other. And I said for every one large commercial deal, there'll probably be 3 early to mid-stage transactions. And after sort of a brief pause during the Liberation Day, the year had really turned out to be exactly how I had predicted last year. We had seen quite a few large late stage to commercial transactions. We've also seen many early to mid stage transactions. So, and we track, and this is what you see on the slide here on the left side, we track this $1 billion upfront transactions historically, and last year was a record year with 26 transactions. And the prior record year was in 2023, and there were 23 transactions. What was fascinating also in my mind in the year was the diversity of both the companies that were acquired in terms of their therapeutic categories, as well as their stage of development. And I think from a size perspective, we've seen 7 transactions greater than $5 billion, which is sort of a serious sort of number of deals as it relates to the historical standards. I mean, the only year that we had more than 7 that are greater than 5 billion was in 2023. So it felt really good, if you will, when you think about the deal making broadly. And as I mentioned, I also love the breadth of the therapeutic areas as well as the stage. Like if we can think about 25, we had almost like a third vis-a-vis early stage that I call it as sort of proof of concept, and a third that is mid stage to late stage, and about a third commercial stage. So that's sort of, I would characterize it as a very healthy M&A market in life sciences. And it's sort of, it was also quite diverse throughout the year. So I think we, from an M&A perspective, I would say we're in a very good place. And 26, we'll talk about it, but 26 will continue likely in that trend. So I have a couple more slides. Let's just tick through those as well. And I know you would want to get to the questions, Carolyn. Okay, so we have here wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the deal volume in the last 7-8 years, and there are a couple different charts, and also again a little bit double clicking on that stage of development from an acquisition perspective. So if you look at the top left chart here, I've shown from 2017 to 2025. Again, while in terms of the number of transactions greater than $1 billion, 2025 was a record year from a volume perspective. We had slightly less than 2023. So in 23, the total number of total volume of the 23 transactions equated to about $140 billion. And mind you, that year we had a very large Seagen acquisition that probably skewed that number a little bit. And last year, I would say, again, a very healthy balance between different sizes of transactions from 1 to 3, 3 to 5, and then 10 to 25. We've seen, 26 transactions that equated to 113. When we think about a little bit of a longer term, 27 to 25, on the top right, you can see where the activity has been in terms of both number of transactions in that period, as well as the amount of transaction volume. So hematology oncology has sort of led our sort of decade, if you will, with 44 transactions in that space, equating to about $200 billion in value. Rare disease follows that with 37 transactions, that is about $180 billion. Then immunology with 28 transactions, that's about $95 billion. Immunology, I would say, together with CNS and now cardiometabolic, have trailed these two therapeutic areas from a historical perspective. However, if I were to think about last few years, immunology has been very, very popular, very attractive. Neuroscience has become very popular in the last couple of years, and as well as the cardiometabolic. So if I were to actually, if you did this chart a little bit by year, you would see that there is a significant rise in immunology transactions and neuroscience transaction, cardiometabolic, versus 2017, 18, 19, if you will. So that's an important thing to note. And on the bottom, which I think is also fascinating from a stage of development perspective, if you look at 2015 to 17, we had sort of about a third of the deals were pre-launch and about 70% was marketed. And if you look at 2018 to 2021 era, only a third was marketed versus 70, so it sort of flipped. But in the last couple of years, I think it's more balanced, quite frankly. We have about 68% pre-launch, but that's split between early stage and late stage, and we had about a third, from a marketed perspective. So I think it's sort of important to understand what's happening. And people generally ask me, like, why is that? I think the shift is happening based on the need of the pharma as well as the scientific innovation that's happening. There is incredible attraction towards late stage to commercial transactions just because of the loss of exclusivity is coming due for a lot of the large players. We have a significant amount of pharmas other than just a few who have significant amount of revenues coming in the next few years and have long time to their patent exclusivity periods. We had quite a few of them that's going to be losing their very large products. Hence, they need to fill that gap with late stage products. Hence, the need for late stage. While they're doing that, that's what I was saying at the beginning of my conversation. For every large late stage commercial deal, there's a few earlier stage assets that happen because while they are sort of filling in the gap from the revenue losses that's coming due from the loss of exclusivities, we also have a lot of innovation happening, and pharmas are ensuring that they're bringing in assets that are innovative, that's going to fill their scientific gaps, if you will. So it's a very healthy, harmonious sort of deal making that's going on right now. And I do, again, anticipate that to happen in 2026, certainly, and maybe in the years beyond, as long as there's a massive exogenous black swan event that happens that pauses a lot of things. But from a fundamental perspective, I think industry is very, very strong and really not even at a mature level yet with respect to activity.
Thanks very much, Eric. And sorry, I disappeared. That's a live event. I disappeared for a little while for an issue with connection because we have a lot of people online. Manon, do you mind to share the last slide for Eric? Or Eric, I don't know if you finished your comments on Manon. Maybe we lost Manon now. So let me just take the slide. Manon? Okay, so I will just maybe we can move to you, Marc. And we had one slide to share your experience. You had two nice biotech in the past, CinCor and Corvidia. You managed to get through M&A. One was sold to Novo Nordisk, and one was also sold to AstraZeneca, one in 2020 and one in 2023, if I'm correct. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience, your expertise, and obviously your success about those M&A and exit, if we can say?
I think what I want to do is share, basically, I think four, considerations about those two deals, as I reflect upon them. I think the number one thing is related actually to what Eric said. I think there is really a thirst for innovation in big pharma, and we know that unfortunately these companies are now depending very much upon biotech to provide that innovation. So when you look at those two companies, those two compounds were essentially first in class. So they were seen as, sort of not necessarily game changer, but certainly very differentiated from anything else that was out there. So I think, the criteria number one, the lesson is if you're a CEO of a biotech, what you really want is to develop a drug that is, highly, at least potentially differentiated. So that's, I think, number one. Number two, the role actually of the biotech company is to try to de-risk in that context, the innovation. So those two companies were actually both in phase 2s. And, I would really highlight the importance of the design of the phase 2s, the size of the phase 2, the population you study, because at the end of the day, these phase 2s are not only obviously to provide, some scientific evidence that the drug may work and it may be safe, but also it's a de-risking event for big pharma, because what you don't want, you don't want to go, into phase 3 and then blow up the phase 3, because as you know, phase 3 is where most of the spend is. So, I can give just the example of CinCor. For CinCor, we're in competition with another company, and the design of the phase 2s were such that we picked 4 different populations where we studied, while our competitor did only 2. And when the results of those phase 2s came out, actually some positive, some negative, I think big pharma had a much better understanding of where the drug could work and where it could not work, which I think helped the conclusion. So I think de-risking in phase 2 is absolutely essential for biotech and to become attractive for big pharma to buy. The third element also I learned is that there's been obviously the slide also from Eric. You saw cardiometabolic has become now number 4 in terms of the therapeutic areas where deals are being done. But back, in 2018, when I joined Corvidia, basically no one wanted to be in cardiovascular. And yet we did, nearly 2 years later, this significant transaction with Novo. So I think the therapeutic area is obviously one consideration, but as a CEO of a biotech, what's again more important is the degree of innovation that you are leading, rather than the therapeutic areas where you're operating. And then the fourth element, in these deals, those deals don't happen, by complete luck. They happen because you have, you build a relationship with big pharma. You talk to them as you move on, and in general, at least for those 2 deals, it took at least 12 months of discussion to complete them. So one has to be, obviously, patient, and having obviously it's core to have a strategy where you can remain independent and make sure you can finance the company as you go forward, because you will never know whether a deal is going to be made or not. So, Caroline, that's sort of my my quick conclusion about those deals. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marc. And just for recently, I shared with you, AstraZeneca was announcing still very good result for the CinCor asset, and I think they are very happy with the acquisition that they made. We would like now maybe to move to the trends of 2026. So what I suggest, we put few slides just for the context to give you where we are in terms of pharma and LOE. The first slide, if I manage to get through my slide. The first slide we wanted to share is that obviously quite a few LOE, loss of exclusivity will come, big brands will come to end of life, if I can say. We will have a first wave in 2025, 2028. Looking just at the top brands of big pharma, 160 billion are exposed. And then in the next 3 years, 2028 to 2031, there's more than 100 million coming, and it's only the big pharma. You can see the area therapeutic, not a surprise, oncology, metabolic, CNS, rare disease are embedded in those indications, and there are some assets in rare disease. Some big brands, which are big part of revenue of some pharma, as you can see on this slide, and they will come to end. So that's going to be really important for the big pharma to replace those assets. Just on this slide, you have nearly 100 billion of loss for those pharma in the potential future. What we've seen also in the last few years is that the pharma, the big pharma, they source their assets a lot externally. If we just look at the approval since 2015 to 2021, it was published in Nature. More than 65% of the assets approved by the FDA by big pharma were coming from external. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the top brands from the big pharma, which have been sourced externally. So relying on biotech for innovation is extremely important for the pharma. It's just also an example. I would be quite happy to have your view as well. We're just showing that the pharma, they have relied also quite heavily on assets with multiple indication. You can see here that Blockbuster from the pharma had not only one indication, some had, but most of them were had multiple indication. And last slide that we have before I hand over to you, it's for the obesity. I mean, we are talking a lot about obesity. Quite happy to hear about the different therapeutic area. It's mainly a slide on licensing, but you can see that quite a few of those deals were done in the obesity field. So Eric,
what Caroline walked through with the LOE, so maybe I'll start talking a little bit about that.
Right.
So look, I think 2026 is going to be, in my mind, a continuation of 25 in many respects, because I think the LOE, as Caroline had shown and as I have mentioned, are still there, right? I mean, if you think about quite a few of the large pharmas, whether it's Keytruda, Ibrance, and many others, as you think about, there is significant revenues. And again, I think in the slide also it's shown that that will likely be lost here. And so the pharmas, when they think about filling that gap, there's two different criteria. Number one is they generally like to, if possible, like to remain within their own therapeutic categories, because that's an area that they know, that's an area that they have sales force, that's an area they have expertise. So if you're a very, very large immunology player or an oncology player and you are about to lose a very large product, ideally you would want to replace that with another product in the similar category, so that you can basically replace that and continue on. So that's sort of the general theme. So if you are sort of if you've never done an ophthalmology deal and you don't have an ophthalmology expertise or sales force, and I'm just giving that as an example, and even if there's a very large product in ophthalmology, that wouldn't be your first go-to place. I think they would probably try other categories and areas, and then they go to the non-core category if there's no option on the other. Having said that, people, if they have in their strategy to establish a specific therapeutic category presence, and if it comes in with a good option with a large product that they could buy and start that sort of therapeutic area with that acquisition, I think they would welcome that and they would do that. And a good example of that, for instance, is Bristol Myers' acquisition of Karuna, as an example, just came to my mind, right? I mean, Bristol hadn't historically had a significant presence after, obviously I'm not talking about many years ago, which obviously they had Abilify and all of that, but when they acquired Karuna, neuroscience wasn't necessarily a place that they had made a ton of investments, had a product, a sales force, but through that acquisition, they sort of established that new leg. And I think while that was also addressing their loss of exclusivity challenge, but they're also, in essence, adding a new therapeutic area. So I think that's sort of how they think about that. So I think that's one category. So we're going to see deals across these therapeutic areas. And if someone is about to acquire a company to address their loss of exclusivity issue, yes, I think it'll be a late stage to commercial stage asset, right? Because they're not going to address an issue in 28, 29 by acquiring a phase 1 asset. So it'll be either phase 3, end of phase 3 in registration or commercial. While that's happening, I think the other theme and trend will also be people looking at this new novel, innovative products, innovative mechanisms, innovative science across all therapeutic areas, right? I think that's sort of an interesting phenomena as well. So we're going to see, deals like, some of the deals I've done, I can talk about, like a Capstan, which is an in vivo CAR T, Orbital. So there's all these new technologies, new modalities, or new approaches, right? I mean, recently sold a company called Halda that sort of addresses both prostate cancer and breast cancer with a new mechanism, new approach, and the like. So I think you're going to see a blend of those earlier stage deals in 26, but also quite a few larger late stage to commercial deals to really address that LOE gap. So let me pause. So Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's sort of how I would think about 26. Again, I really do believe 26 will be a very strong year. And I would say one other thing that is important, again, hopefully if this stays our way, there's been, again, I know we'll talk about it later, but there is better regulatory certainty today than 6 months ago. And that helps. These are always tailwinds for CEO confidence, as well as I think we see a broader, at least sentiment, more of a business-friendly environment from Fed's perspective with respect to the rates and potential easing and the lowering the rates in the US generally has been a booster for both the capital markets activity in life sciences as well as M&A activity. So if you track those years that we've seen more deals and we've seen a lot of activity and we've seen XBI, for instance, a proxy for biotech index, have done very well, has been at the times of sort of more Fed easing versus Fed tightening. So I think those are important tailwinds I think we're seeing today in the marketplace that makes me very confident about 26.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Mark, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it was very comprehensive, and anyway, he sees the entire market. So I fully support what he said. Yeah.
To start, one question we have: can we see any difference or differences between dealing with a big pharma, as we can say, or dealing with a mid-sized pharma? What are the main things to consider when you're speaking to a big pharma or maybe to a mid-sized pharma?
On the mid-pharma side, I can speak because I'm still the chairman of Ipsen, so I can share a bit the consideration when you are a mid-pharma company. So I think what you are looking into into a biotech deal, one thing is indeed the fact that you're in competition potentially with again the big guys. So the upside potential or the potential of the drug that you're looking for, is probably not in the same range as big pharma. I attended actually a number of conferences, last year, where some of the CBOs of big pharma spoke, and I was pretty much struck to hear that at least for the big guys, they are now looking at assets that are going to generate 3 billion plus in sales to offset some of their LOEs. So for a medium-sized company, you cannot be obviously, or it's going to be very hard to do a deal for a drug that would have a potential of 3 billion and plus, because it's going to be too expensive. But where you can be is between probably 500 million to 1.5 billion, and there are less there is less competition. And maybe I can comment to that because I don't have the statistics, but my impression of 2025 was actually the mid-sized companies were pretty active in terms of deal making, because they still need, again, to replace. Also, they have the same issue. They have also LOEs expiring, but it's just the nature of the amount is going to be minimal. And then I think also part of the dilemma when you're a mid-sized company is exactly also what Eric talked about is, do you do a deal in a therapeutic area where you are present, where you have obviously the expertise and so on, versus going into a new area where you may not have a lot of experience, but the asset may actually be quite attractive and maybe pretty cheap to develop or to commercialize. So these are the sort of the kind of tensions that exist at mid pharma to do deals.
Yeah, no, I would just add a couple comments. I think I agree with everything Marc said. I think the natural limitation of the mid-sized pharma will be the capital, as well as the specific therapeutic category that they're going to be playing in, because by nature they are not going to be in as many categories as a big pharma would be. So their target universe would be narrower. That's the first point. Second point, because of the wherewithal, there's going to be a limit of how much they can pay, and this doesn't mean they don't have the money in the bank or they can't raise the money, they cannot finance it. It doesn't mean that. What I mean is that if you're a $15 billion company and if you're buying a $3-4 billion company, then you're going to be extra cautious because it's sort of your 20%, 25% of your market cap that you're really betting and risking, versus a big pharma, a $5 billion deal may be anywhere from 1% to 3% of your market cap. So it's not like a big deal. So therefore, that's a very important difference. Having said all of this, and also sort of lastly, the third big difference is we see less risk tolerance or risk taking from the mid-sized pharma versus the big pharma as it relates to stage of development and so on and so forth. Having said all of this, though, we have started seeing a shift to the mid-sized pharma being more acquisitive, more aggressive than the historical levels. Even in 2025, we've seen more deals by the likes of Ipsen. Obviously, Marc and I did that deal. Marc was the buyer. I was the advisor to the target. Ipsen acquired Imchek, which is a great AML early stage asset. But also we've seen, very recently I sold, a product called Radicava from Mitsubishi Tanabe to Shionogi in Japan for $2.5 billion. Obviously Janmab acquired Merus. So, Merck KGaA from Germany acquired SpringWorks that I've sold. So when you think about this, we're seeing more and more mid-size pharma activity happening in the marketplace, and I think we're going to see more of that. So historically in M&A, we thought the buyer pool is 15 large pharmas. I think buyer pool is more like 30, 40 these days across the globe, that we're seeing more and more of it.
Thanks so much, Eric. Maybe another question where we can start with Marc, and in terms of commercialization, what is your feeling and your recommendation on when to integrate the commercial strategy in the development, and how it's going to be important for the future M&A deal with pharma?
Obviously, if you are let's say in a late stage of phase 2 or phase 3 biotech company, commercial consideration are obviously increasingly important. Obviously, if you're in phase 3 or post phase 3, even more. I can give you the example of again with CinCor, we spent about 4 hours, I think, dinner with Pascal Soriot and the head of commercialization at AZ before we did the transaction, and there were a lot of questions on the positioning of the drug, competition, and so on. So I think it is absolutely important that the CEO of a biotech has a good understanding of commercialization issues. And it's not, as you know, anymore the pure registration package which is at stake. It's obviously a must to get the approval. But more and more, it's a payer environment that has changed so much in the US and outside of the US. So a lot of consideration needs to be made, upfront in the clinical development in terms of, again, the differentiation and how, this drug is going to be reimbursed versus the other, and why, it would justify a premium and what data you need to do that. So, phase two, again, I told you before, de-risking is obviously one big thing, but understanding, what patient profile you want to treat and where you're going to get the best response, so that, again, you become the natural leader over time of that patient pool. So these are absolutely critical. And the chief commercial officer at big pharma, certainly when you are, for example, at phase 3 stage, has also a big say. It's the chief scientific officer as chief medical officer will be obviously critical as well. But the weight of the commercial organization is key in wanting or not wanting an asset. So.
Thanks so much, Marc. Eric, do you have any perspective on the commercialization from your discussion?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, obviously agree with everything Marc said. The only thing I would add is it also having sort of a commercial strategy and having thought through this, have a commercial leader, and particularly if you're a very late stage company, being ready and prepared to launch your drug, I think in M&A setting is a very, very strong leverage, and it's a credible standalone story. Because if you didn't prepare any of that, and when a buyer approaches you, what are you going to say? You're going to say, I'm launching the product in a year, but you have not done any preparation. You don't know the market. You don't know. It's not credible. So I think it's important, and that it gives the targets a big leverage in the discussion, and you get quite frankly a better price, more than the price that you would have said. I am just reminded of a deal from several years ago. I sold this company called Kite Pharma to Gilead, about a $12 billion deal. Kite was literally ready to launch the product, like, again, this before approval or anything, but they have hired all their sales force, they have mapped out the whole market, and they have raised the capital. And in that negotiation, if you didn't give me the price I need, I'm launching the drug. I don't need your help. That is a very important leverage in these negotiations. So not only helps sell the story, but it also helps to ensure your credibility with the buyer to get a better deal out of it.
Thank you very much, Eric. Maybe we can move to the regulatory environment, especially in the US. We heard a lot of different names and from the administration. I mean, the tariff, the MFN. Historically, we also had the IRA. And what are the impact of those events for the deal, and in particular the MFN? We are now 9 months down the line. We've seen some deals done by the big pharma, but could the MFN impact the deals? And the example that we are hearing, Eric, are typically if you do a deal with another region in the world, could it impact the sale of a company in general?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So first of all, I think from a market's perspective, okay, and from a strategic acquisition interest perspective, we haven't really seen the impact of a negative MFN. So maybe some things are priced, maybe their models are assuming some level of impact, but we haven't seen in deal setting a pharma shying away from acquiring a particular company just because of the concerns around MFN. That's the first big point. So I haven't seen that. Quite frankly, I haven't seen, and the IRA has been around for a while, I haven't seen that to be super negative either, although I am certain the buyers are factoring all of that into their modeling. So there's no question about that. But it wasn't sort of, well, this is a small molecule, so it has a 9-year versus 13-year in biologic. Therefore, I don't want to buy the small molecule. I want to buy biologic. We didn't see that. Okay. I think, again, the pharma continues to be, I think Marc said it at the very beginning when he was talking about Corvidia and CinCor. It's about the data. It's about the science. It's about the opportunity. So it's not anything else. So pharma's perspective, you know, they want to like make sure they like the product profile. They want to make sure that they believe it has an impact on the patient. So it has not a marginal benefit, but it is transformative impact, and it's safe, right? And it has sort of a place in the marketplace. And I think when those boxes are checked, then we go into, okay, let's just go do the modeling of this and see how that goes. And they do their usual modelings, and they have multiple scenarios, and they assume some pricing growth, some pricing decline, some downside scenarios, and they come to a conclusion. And so I haven't seen that impacting the deal making, quite frankly, in a meaningful way. Again, I am sure it's reflected in the model, but I haven't seen that has to be a big factor. However, for instance, during the Liberation Day, I think I mentioned after a very strong start, there was a pause in sort of late February, March, early April for about 2 months as people were figuring out, is there a worst case scenario? But then people kind of figured out that no, there's not going to be worst case scenario. We're going to be fine. We're going to manage this through. And the deal flow has started and has been very strong since then. Now, also, the deals the president have announced with or struck with all these pharma leaders, and they've announced together, I think markets generally embraced them. So it wasn't like a catastrophe or anything. It was, you know, business friendly, and they were overall happy with it. Now, does that mean that we're sort of clear for the future and there's no concern? No, that's not true. People are concerned of what may, of the unknown, right? So that is obviously out there. But from where we are today, I don't see that being sort of a major impediment of doing. Now, the second part of your question, I'll very briefly touch on that. If somebody did an ex-US deal, you know, is that a problem? So that is discussed, okay? So that does become a point. It doesn't mean that if you did do a deal with an ex-US partner, all of a sudden no one will buy that company. We haven't seen that. I will say that it's generally a case by case based on therapeutic category and the pricing dynamics of that. And a lot of it's TBD. So I think overall, therefore, we've seen less ex-US transactions in the last 12 months than historically. People are a bit more concerned and conservative about it. But I have also, again, haven't seen, you know, look, we saw these companies, right? I mean, that are commercial that have launched globally. Pharma isn't saying, oh, you launched in ex-US territory, so that pricing is lower, so I'm not going to give you credit for your US pricing. We haven't seen that. So people are actually still acquiring those companies with global sort of sales, even though there's different pricing points. But that is, I would say, that is an area of still question mark that people haven't concluded yet. So Marc, I'm sure you have thoughts on this one.
I think, I mean, that's also my understanding. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. I won't be able to share my slide anymore, but I'm going to try to explain what I want to say with a question. I mean, we wanted to discuss about China because we've seen recently quite a few mainly licensing deals, quite significant deals from the big pharma. I mean, AstraZeneca, AbbVie, Roche, Merck did big deals with Chinese companies because they are coming with very strong assets, innovative assets in field of oncology, immunology, metabolic diseases. Eric, maybe starting with you, what do you think about China? How do you see 2026 playing in the M&A, also seen and the Chinese perspective?
Yeah, look, I think China, there's a lot of deal making happening in China. No question about that. I think in the last 18 months or so, I would say, again, I think I can substantiate just, but it's almost 50% or if not more of the BD deals in oncology, cardiovascular, and immunology was sourced out of China, and that is very, very material as it compares to the historical standards. And I think we're seeing a lot of the pharmas being very active in China business development. There's a lot of being struck. Not all of it may be announced either, so there's a lot of deals going on. So that is obviously quite frankly, a concern from a US sort of biotech industry perspective. There's, I think the pace of development in China is very competitive. From discovery to human data is very, very fast. I think from a US or European regulatory perspective, I really encourage all the regulators to reconsider the path from discovery to human data and whether we can accelerate some of that timelines and maybe limit some of the steps and the like, so that the Europe US becomes sort of more competitive. There's no question innovation is still US and Europe is at the forefront of innovation. Here we create a lot of the molecules we discover, and I think we need to we need to follow through on that initial innovation so that China biotech industry doesn't necessarily quickly now all of a sudden get ahead of the US players because they can get to the human data faster if US and Europe wants to remain competitive. But I think a lot of activity happening, and I think it's a very transformed industry that is also supported by the broader China regulatory environment and the government and everything else. So they have clearly identified biopharma and life sciences as a major strategic initiative, and I think they're sort of following through. I think we need to do that in the US and reconsider and support the sector in a way to remain competitive with that, and then need to probably pause some of the unnecessary maybe or extra conservative activities that sort of slows down the process and the pace.
Okay, thanks so much, Eric. Marc, do you want to comment around the China innovation?
Well, again, only comment on the IBD side, with Abivax, but just as an example, in October we had this big congress, gastro congress called UEG, where we made the plenary because of our phase 3 results, induction results. But the next company after us was actually a Chinese company, which was presenting new data, phase 2 with a new mechanism of action. So I think it's the illustration that some of these companies are coming now to the forefront. At least in that case, we believe that the presentation that was made was not of the highest quality, at least in terms of the data provided. Some data was actually quite good, but it was not as complete as I would say, a normal US or European company would present. But there is undoubtedly, the arrival of more Chinese competition. And also, actually, what's also quite interesting for Abivax is because of our increased visibility, we are getting actually, insourcing, or these Chinese companies that are developing a new compound for IBD are actually calling us to potentially co-develop or do, or buy their assets. So I think, yes, they are coming for sure. Yeah.
Thanks so much. We are coming nearly at the end of this webinar. As we discussed at the beginning of this call, we are 3 days away or 4 days away from the JP Morgan conference. Eric, any advice you would give for people attending and preparing for this conference that they need to ensure they do well?
Look, I think JP Morgan event obviously is a very key event in our industry. They've done an amazing job bringing the whole industry in one place. It's just more what happens around the conference than at conference, obviously. I think it's a very good opportunity for biotech executives to tell their stories to the pharma counterparts from a business development perspective. I think it's one of those unique environments and opportunities where just having a meeting with a pharma counterparty doesn't mean that you're trying to sell your company or you're too eager or you're you're sort of risking your future or anything of that sort. It's just more people talk, share ideas, collaborate. It's one that everyone does. It's a very innocent environment from that perspective versus if you didn't do your meeting then, and if you just reached out to any of these pharma executives a month later and want to have a meeting, they would say, okay, why are you having a meeting with me? Whereas in JP Morgan, they're not going to say that because everyone does it, right? So that's a very good, I think, opportunity. I would recommend people not be shy about reaching out, having these meetings. It doesn't mean, that you are in active talks to sell your company or in partnering. I call this, share your excitement about your data with the counterparts for the common good, and some good thing will come out of that, whether it's collaboration or something else. So I would encourage that. Obviously, it's an environment where a lot of the investors also present, so it's a good opportunity to reach out to whether you're a public company, to public life sciences investors or generalists, or if you're a private company, all the venture capitalists are there. So that's also good, important for capital raise, etc. So I would say take advantage of that. It's really a speed date, but it's a good speed date where you can follow up with a more fulsome meeting. I do 30-minute meetings, coffee chats, whatever, and then I follow up. Maybe I do 40 meetings in a few days, and then I follow up with 5 to 7 new, interesting, exciting companies during the year. So that's I find it very productive. I think everyone can take advantage of that as a result.
Marc, as a CEO, any key things you would recommend to maybe all the CEO attending this presentation?
Yeah, I think it boils down to again essentially target population that you would be in touch with. One, I would say, investor first, because usually Monday, Tuesday you are with with investors, especially if you're a public CEO. So it's great to catch up. In our case at Abivax, what we'll do is we'll do actually like we did actually in 2025. We'll do a press release ahead of JP Morgan just to give a bit the goals and the excitement for 2026, what to expect. And we'll meet with investors. And then, as Eric said, obviously there will be some discussion with Big Pharma on where we are and the excitement about our program. So that's JP Morgan. But again, it's very fast. It's a fast-paced environment, and then usually it takes a week to recover from that week. So
JP Morgan, but we are just at the beginning of the year. Any recommendation from the two of you on what meetings to attend as a CEO of biotech? What would be your recommendation? Maybe starting with Eric.
I would say maybe based on everyone's their own industry or therapeutic category, there's these amazing industry conferences that I think a lot of things happen actually more than your typical other banker events or the like. I do like if you're an oncology company, you want to attend ASCO. If you're sort of a hematology company, you want to attend like ASH. If you are ophthalmology company, you want to attend the ophthalmology event. If you're a GI company, you want to attend the GI event. So I think there's all these core industry specific events. And it's also very much where the scientific counterparts attend, not just the BD people, but scientific counterparts. And don't forget the core decision makers in deciding to acquire or partner a company in an earlier stage or mid stage for a commercial stage will be the scientific people in these pharmas. It's not just the BD person. BD person is just the glue, bring it all together. They're not going to decide, okay, I'm buying this company versus that company. They're the one who makes the deal happen when there's a decision to buy the company. So if you're a commercial stage company, you obviously need to deal with the commercial people in those organizations. But if you are sort of an early to mid stage, you want to make sure you're talking to the scientific officers. And in fact, you want to talk to not just the CSO. Sometimes people think, oh, I got to talk to global head of R&D at this big pharma. They're very important, obviously. But I think at an earlier initial stages of the conversation, I highly recommend people finding their therapeutic area CMOs. So if you're, if you want to talk to, Pharma A for a GI, go find the GI CMO in that company, not the chief medical officer. And by the way, that person will be 100% attending that GI conference, and you can find them and is more accessible, or she's more accessible as a result. But anyway, Marc, please add to it.
Yeah, no, I think this is fundamental, and it's not only also the interface between biotech and the big pharma, but it's also the opportunity to speak with the key doctors, because again, at the end of the day, the drug is going to be used by doctors, and the doctors who are, for example, participating in the clinical trials have actually more impact to some extent than the company, because they see whether the drug works or whether it doesn't work. They see the safety side, they see the efficacy. There is less bias probably from the doctors than from the company. So yeah, highly important to attend these meetings, and and for investors, again, all investors tend to attend these big events, because they also need to appreciate the nuance of the aspect of the drug as it is perceived by the doctors.
Thank you very much. We are unfortunately at the end of this webinar. We have to make the conclusion. So thanks so much to the two of you for coming and sharing your insights for 2026. We had a record audience today. Just for the audience, we will be happy to share the slides because we didn't manage to show them. And the live webinar should be available very soon as well. So thanks so much to you. We are wishing you a very good JP Morgan and a very good year also for 2026. Thanks, Eric, and thank Marc also for this webinar.
Thanks, Karin.
Thank you very much. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.